Mechanic is thrown out of a luxury restaurant. Minutes later, a single call leaves the owner trembling. The evening at Beaumont, the most prestigious and opulent restaurant in all of New York City, was in full swing. Golden light from crystal chandeliers cascaded down onto pristine white tablecloths, each table adorned with the most exquisite fine china money could buy. The soft clinking of silverware, the murmured conversations of the city's elite, and the delicate notes of a live jazz band wove together into a symphony of exclusivity. Every detail screamed sophistication. Every guest, dressed to perfection, basked in the grandeur of the evening. James Carter, a mechanic by trade, stepped cautiously through the grand entrance. His best pair of jeans and a neatly pressed button-up shirt were a far cry from the designer suits and evening gowns that surrounded him, but he held his head high. He wasn't here by mistake. He had been invited. No, summoned by someone whose name carried weight. But before he could take another step, an older gentleman with a stiff posture and an air of condescension intercepted him. The maitre d', with his piercing gaze, let his eyes sweep over James's attire. His disapproval barely concealed beneath a practiced smile. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. His voice clipped and professional but laced with underlying scorn. "I believe you may be in the wrong place." James's brows knit together. "I don't think so," he replied evenly. "I have a reservation." "Carter." The maitre d' let out a quiet, disdainful scoff. "I'm afraid we have a strict dress code. We don't accommodate individuals in workman's attire." His tone sharpened on the last words, making it clear James was unwelcome. James inhaled slowly, biting back his frustration. Instead of arguing, he reached into his pocket for his phone, ready to prove his invitation. But before he could even unlock the screen, two uniformed security guards stepped forward at the maitre d's subtle signal. "Sir, you need to leave." A wave of heat crawled up James's neck, a mixture of embarrassment and anger settling in his chest as he was ushered toward the door. Around him, the whispers of wealthy patrons carried like a breeze, their hushed voices tinged with amusement. A few even wore smirks as they sipped their expensive wine, entertained by the spectacle. James didn't lash out. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he stepped outside, took a steadying breath, and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a number and pressed call. The line connected almost instantly. "Yeah, it's me," James said calmly, though there was an edge beneath his words. "I just got thrown out of Beaumont." There was silence, then a sharp inhale. "What?" The voice on the other end was laced with quiet, dangerous disbelief. James allowed himself a smirk. "Apparently, I don't meet the dress code." A string of curses burst through the receiver before the voice steadied, now controlled but thick with unspoken rage. "Stay right there. Don't move. I'll be there in 10 minutes. James slid his phone back into his pocket and leaned against his truck, watching the grand entrance as luxury vehicles arrived one after another. Valets scrambled to open doors, greeting guests with polished smiles, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Exactly 10 minutes later, the air shifted. A sleek, black limousine rolled to a stop at the curb. The moment the door opened, the atmosphere around Beaumont changed. William Montgomery stepped out, a name that carried more power than most in the city. Billionaire, hotelier, restaurateur. Ruthlessly efficient, impeccably refined. A man feared and respected in equal measure. And James Carter, the one man he owed his life to. Montgomery didn't hesitate. He strode toward the restaurant's entrance, and James followed behind him at a leisurely pace, his hands in his pockets. The security guards who had thrown him out stiffened, glancing at one another uncertainly. But it was the maitre d' whose face drained of all color as Montgomery locked eyes with him. "Yes, sir, I." Montgomery raised a hand, silencing him instantly. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "You refused entry to my personal guest, a man to whom I owe more than I can ever repay." His words dripped with restrained fury, his usual composed demeanor cracking just enough to send a ripple of tension through the room. The maitre d' stammered, his confidence from earlier crumbling. I wasn't aware. And that's the problem, Montgomery cut in, his tone slicing through the maitre d's excuse like a blade. You judged him by his clothes, by his profession, rather than his worth. Do you even know who this man is? He didn't wait for a response. His voice rang out, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. If not for James Carter, I wouldn't be standing here today. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Conversations halted, and eyes widened in realization. The same people who had whispered mockery just moments ago now looked at James with shock, trying to piece together the story behind Montgomery's words. James sighed, shaking his head. Bill, you don't have to. But Montgomery turned to him, his expression resolute. No, James. This is my business, and I will not allow arrogance and prejudice to tarnish its name. He turned back to the maitre d', his voice cold. You're fired. Effective immediately. The maitre d' swayed slightly, his complexion ghostly white. Sir, please, leave. There was no room for argument. With his head bowed in defeat, the maitre d' shuffled away. His departure met with nothing but silence. Montgomery then scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the very patrons who had ridiculed James earlier. Let this be a lesson to all of you, he announced, his voice carrying across the restaurant. The worth of a person is not in the fabric of their clothing, but in the integrity of their character. And let me tell you now, James Carter is worth more than every one of you sitting here combined. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. James rubbed the back of his neck, visibly uncomfortable with the attention, but there was no escaping it now. The whispers had shifted, no longer laced with scorn but with awe. Respect. Montgomery's expression softened. Now, he said, let's get something to eat. And just like that, James Carter, who had been sneered at and cast out minutes before, was led to the most exclusive table in the restaurant. The same patrons who had looked down on him now watched with widened eyes, their previous judgment replaced with stunned admiration. By the time the night was over, James didn't leave Beaumont as just a mechanic. He left as the man who had humbled the elite.